Welcome back to Taiwan versus the world. Today we'll discuss the visit of German Chancellor Friedrich Merz to China, taking enough distance to look at it calmly and without bias. Then we will explore how Taiwan can use its growing video game industry to strengthen its soft power. And now, let's begin with our interview. Today we are going to come back to the visit of German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who visited China on the 25th and 26th of February. He talked with Xi Jinping, he talked with Premier Li Qiang. It may feel surprising that we are going back to this event in line of everything that happened in between. But that's by design. We kind of let the steam pass, and now we are going to look at it in a more quiet and peaceful manner, and hopefully reach more rational conclusions. Today with us are Sasha Chhabra and Sana Hashmi. Sasha and Sana, welcome.
Thank you.
Happy to be here, Julian.
I would just briefly ask you guys to introduce yourself for the audience in case somebody doesn't know you yet.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. It's such a pleasure to be back on RTI. I am a fellow at Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation. That's a think tank based out of Taipei. And I'm a long term resident of Taiwan, have been here for 6 years. Thank you.
Hi, Julian. Great to be back on as usual. I'm a Taipei-based security analyst, and I look at Taiwan's foreign policy and also the strategic situation around the world. And I've had affiliations with several security and defense-related think tanks here and around the world.
Thank you both. And let's make first a little summary of what happened. So we know that Germany's leader has visited China and talked with its leader. So in short, what did you observe about the visit?
I would say notable about this visit is maybe how not notable it is. We don't see any major announcements coming out of this, no big deals, no big new developments. But that's also just a reflection of business as usual. We've seen a lot of these Western leaders visiting Beijing recently, including leaders of Canada, the United Kingdom, and some of these have been followed by criticism because of domestic constituencies or criticism from the United States that they're not hewing to a hard line on China. But at the end of the day, this is reflecting that China is the world's either second or first largest economy, depending on how you count it. It's integral to global supply chains, and it's one of the world's great powers. So countries are going to have to find a way to deal with it, even if they are close U.S. allies. And this is only made all the more necessary by some of the rifts that are opening up between the Western countries.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with Sasha there. I think it was more symbolic. We didn't really see a lot of outcomes, deliverables coming out of the visit, and I don't think the expectation was to get much out of China. I think it was very transactional. The idea was to manage the risk, primarily in the economic domain. So I won't really call it a breakthrough. And a flurry of visits have been happening from Europe to China. So I don't think we have to see it as something that leaders are bowing down to the Chinese leadership. I think there are just economic strategic rationales, and there's just a compulsion for them to go and engage with the Chinese leadership. So I would call it that it was a pragmatic or transactional visit rather than something that is transformative, or that is something that is going to change China's relationship with Germany or EU broadly. So I think it was just something that in the current geopolitical landscape, this just has to happen. This is something that we have to get used to it. Leaders engaging with the Chinese leadership. So I think there's a lot of conflict between the normative ideas that a lot of European leaders have and the economic concerns, economic interests that they have. So I would say that there was not anything that was transformational. It was just something that was born out of compulsion.
Yes, this is something actually that you and I discussed together briefly, Sana, before the interview. I remember us agreeing that pretty much that's his job as Chancellor of Germany. He has to go around and meet other national leaders, especially when they are leaders of a powerful country. And Yet you are both here agreeing that we should not read too much in this visit, and yet it has been abundantly commented with a lot of people pretty much lambasting Europe in general through the German chancellor as if somehow he represented the entire continent as coming there to bow down to China or to take instructions from China. There's been comments that he's been naive about it, etc., etc. So while there have been so much criticism of Merz going to China, when the three of us here, as far as we can see, it seems like it was just routine visit of a guy doing his job.
I don't think all the criticism is invalid. At the end of the day, Germany, European Union, Western countries have certainly misplayed their hand with China over the years. And you can just look to the decimation of the German auto industry that's going to come from all these EVs. But largely, I mean, look at over the last 20, 30 years, you've seen entire factories were basically chopped up in Germany, sent down to the ports, shipped over to China, and those jobs were lost. And that's simply a failure of policy that led to deindustrialization, and we've seen that result in a lot of the issues we've seen today in Germany and Europe and the U.S. So certainly a lot of the criticism does come from a valid place, and it certainly is true as well that for all the rhetoric that's happening, there isn't necessarily a strategic plan that's come out on how to deal with China's economic dominance, its growing military threats around the world and other thorny issues, including, transnational repression that's happening in Europe, particularly among Chinese dissidents or the large Uyghur community in Germany. And you've seen a lot of these discussions happening in the UK around the Hong Kong community there. So that's where a lot of the frustration is coming from. And I think a lot of that criticism is valid, but also a lot of it is strategically untenable at this point. There's no easy way to undo 20, 30 years of engagement, of accommodation that's happened with the PRC. And all of these countries, let's call them these sort of second tier middle powers, Germany, Canada, US, UK, these are countries that are acting in a situation where the US is at oftentimes being hostile to them or threatening them. They're not able to act in a united way against China. So this does put them in a very difficult position where if they were to try to act strategically or push back in a strong way on certain key issues, they're not necessarily able to do this. Even as a grouping together, the EU is not unified and it's not able to match China on a whole host of issues. So it is quite a difficult place to be in from both sides. And I think it's worth reflecting on the last several decades of failure of Western policy regarding China in this regard.
I think I have two views on that. First, I think we generally, scholars and journalists, have this binary lens with respect to China and with respect to leaders, world leaders going to China, as in it's never black and white, I would say. But then, having said that, of course, these leaders have been talking about de-risking, decoupling for a couple of years, and now putting the blame on the US entirely. And this is coming from someone who is very critical of China, who's very cognizant of the China threat towards India, towards Taiwan, and towards Europe as well. But then, what was done when these leaders talked about de-risking? COVID-19 happened, and there was the idea that perhaps these countries need to decouple from China, which was shifted to de-risking. But then nothing, no country actually did anything to de-risk from China. I think there was a lot of rhetoric, there was a lot of talk of this economic coercion that is coming out of China, and how China has been using this economic over dependence to achieve political objectives. But then, and look at Germany, as in the trade deficit with China is over 100 billion US dollars. So, how do you deal with it? What were these countries doing for the past couple of years? But then also the onus is on China. China is not really doing anything to reduce that trade deficit, to reduce that economic dependence. So, I feel that, of course, uh, there is a compulsion that no one country really wants to have trade war with the two superpowers that we have, the US and China. And sadly or surprisingly, the US is becoming much more unpredictable than China. It is becoming much more difficult to deal with the US as of now, uh, if you compare it with dealing with China. So I do feel that there is this catch 22 situation that is going on with this country. And if it tells us anything, that is that the EU, the Europe, the entire continent is so much divided on China, so much divided on how to deal with the US and how to deal with China. So I think they is, as Sasha said, this is the time to reflect and see what could have been done and what hasn't been done. But definitely, how to deal with China was something that was never really paid attention to in a meaningful, in a serious way.
So what's interesting from you are telling me is that indeed there has been a lot of mistakes made by Germany and by others, but basically it's much deeper, more deeply rooted than just a single visit by one chancellor last month. So probably it's not just one meeting or absence of a meeting that's going to solve that. Uh, if we can come back a bit into the history of Germany's engagement with China in the recent decades. What can you tell me about what Germany has done? Uh, Being based in Europe like 20 years ago, uh, a lot of us in Brussels were saying that Germany was the problem actually when it came to China, that it was the country that was the most eager under Angela Merkel to make money with China, while other countries were kind of being more careful in their approach, and they were laughed at by the Merkel administration. And in the end, this is the situation we're in. But then again, that's what was said at the time in Brussels. How do you reflect on that? Do you think that was accurate? What can you tell me about what Germany has done with China?
Deindustrialization is probably the biggest issue here. You look at the pursuit of short-term gains, where Germany is a large manufacturing power, looked at the time China as an incredibly large market that was irresistible, and also as an opportunity then to uh, improve its profit margins by shifting its production to China, and in the process transferring a lot of technology. This is not unique to Germany. Taiwan did this, Japan did this, United States has done this, every country has done this, and we're now reaping those results. So there's that fundamental issue where you've not just pursued these short-term profits, but deindustrialized the country and ended up in a way where you're now further behind. Where we once spoke of technology transfer from the West to China, what the Germans are interested now is technology transfer back from China to them to learn how to make the best EVs and the best robotic manufacturing. If you look at all the developments today in AI-directed manufacturing and the use of robots and assembly lines, China is leading the way in innovation. But we have no plan for this. In any country in the West, this was pretty easy for China to do at the time because they offered this uh, perfect mix of everything you could want, a stable labor force in place, low costs, and then they just acquired all the technology in the process. But there's nothing that the West really has to offer China to get any of that technology back or to learn from China. And the fundamental issues that have made Western manufacturing non-competitive are still there. The labor is way too high. Labor rights and regulations in Europe are even worse. I mean, they're good for the workers, but they're decreasing innovation in Germany. You can just look at the difficulties TSMC and TSMC's entire supply chain have had trying to get started in Germany because the regulations are simply too thorny, not just ones with worker protection, but just very simple regulations that are not conducive to starting business. You can look at also there's the simple lack of capital in the system that a lot of the lack of innovation coming out of Europe has been this, it's simply too hard to get capital. The US has remained very competitive and innovative, not in manufacturing, but in services industries and IT and technology because capital is so easily available. Anything can get funded, any idea can get funded, and a lot of those fail, but a lot of those do become very, very successful. Contrast that with Europe, where it's very, very hard to raise capital. You're generally still raising capital from, the United States financial centers as well. The result of this is a lack of innovation, and this is all laid out very clearly in the report that Mario Draghi prepared for the European Union nearly 2 years ago now. But as we've seen in those 2 years, there's no interest in taking the collective action in Europe to deal with that problem. So I think this leaves again us with a very uh, pessimistic or difficult outlook here because even if there is a clear path to addressing this, to reversing all the failures that have happened, and we've just been talking about manufacturing, but we can talk about other issues like research security, integrity of supply chains for military hardware, and security issues, and a whole number of domains. There simply is no strategy, and this is compounded with the fact that this break that's happening now with the West is going to make it very difficult for any actor to pursue one coherent strategy. The best strategy, of course, would be the West coming together, the United States with the European powers, UK, Canada, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, and working in concert on all of these issues. Combined, they're much, much more powerful than China. They're able to address the manufacturing and capital deficits. But we can see that that is simply not going to happen, at least for the next 3 years.
I think I won't really single out Germany here. It was the approach of all the Western countries, specifically since China's accession to the WTO, that they saw an opportunity with China's rise, that there are economic opportunities, and then look at the US, look at UK, France, Germany, and also it was beneficial for Germany, German auto industry. But now situation has totally changed. If you look at what is the demand in China right now, it's mostly for Chinese EV. So there's a lot of competition. So how do you justify that to your business industry, to your domestic audience, is something I think Germany is dealing with. But then if you look at it, if you compare the approach of the Western world, Western Europe with the Central Eastern Europe, I think Central Eastern European countries are doing much better with respect to China. And the dependence that was built over decades, now China is a manufacturing hub of the world. China is the largest trading partner of the majority uh, countries in the world. And then apart from that is huge trade imbalance that a lot of countries are facing, and it's in billions and billions of dollar. And then of course the overcapacity that is in China, and then the dumping of goods in these countries. And then you talk about it, you raise these concerns, but then what is the solution? China isn't really paying any attention. China isn't really taking any action towards that. So I feel they have kind of become a victim of their own doing. And specifically from the European side, there is hardly any coherent economic strategy to deal with China. And why? Because there's hardly any common interest, common concerns, and the perception of how China is viewed is totally different among countries. So I feel this is one of the reasons why we are seeing all these leaders going to China. And the idea is not to achieve a breakthrough, because that's impossible. How do you get China to the negotiating table, and how do you get China to agree to your demands, is something that I don't think that China is even willing to do. But I think that the idea is just to talk to China and just to see how their bare minimum could be achieved. I think this is just about how they weren't able to achieve what they were supposed to achieve a couple of years. So I feel that with Germany, and if you look at it, it's just not China. There are a lot of countries that are also going to India. And the alternative to the China problem, to the China threat, is actually India. So I think when we start criticizing all these leaders going to China, we forget that they are just not going to China. They're looking for alternatives. And India is absolutely one of the alternatives for Germany, for a lot of European countries. But I don't really see any solution to the problem that we are facing today, because there's hardly any institutionalized response to it. And specifically with Trump in power, there is no credible, reliable partner within this transatlantic partnership. So I think the idea is just to look towards Asia, and China and India are the only viable options for these countries as of now.
So yes, you're raising an interesting point here, is that at the end of the day, maybe Germany has no other choice than to go to talk to China. And Sasha, also you were saying something interesting, is that Germany or even Europe is hardly alone discussing with China. As you said, even years ago when Germany was full-blown working with China on economical matters, well, so were the United States, actually. So was Taiwan during the Ma years. A lot of people in Taiwan today are very rich because they made business with Taiwan. And we hear some people having this knee-jerk reaction saying, oh, why do they go see China? Why do they talk to China? Well, Trump also wants to meet with Xi Jinping. As a matter of fact, even President Lai Ching-te and the DPP would be very happy to talk to China. It's China who refused to talk to them. So isn't there a bit of a double standard that somehow everybody has the right to go and talk with Xi Jinping, except the Chancellor of Germany or the British Prime Minister. When they do it, it's bad, but when the others do it, it's okay.
I think sometimes that is true. You certainly see, countries like, the U.S., there's never any question if it's good that US leader decides to meet with China. But when another country decides to do so, you'll see a lot of criticism. But it's not true necessarily always that meeting is cost free. I do believe in dialogue. I think, as you pointed out rightly, the leaders of Taiwan have consistently always said we're open to talking with Chinese leadership with no preconditions, and that's like a very good attitude to have in international relations. But it doesn't happen precisely because China imposes preconditions, and the preconditions to a meeting at that level are to accept this concept of a one China and to accede to China's political terms. And while that doesn't apply in the same way to Western countries, to other countries, countries that China has formal diplomatic relations with, there certainly can be costs. If you meet with Xi Jinping and you don't raise the issue of political prisoners, particularly if they're nationals of your country, if you're not prepared to address the serious issues posed by Chinese espionage, gray zone activities, any of the other malign ways that China acts in the system, or as well the way it acts towards other countries like Taiwan and the Philippines. This is something that allies of those countries and countries that value Indo-Pacific security should be speaking up on as well. But I haven't really seen evidence of capitulation in any of these meetings. There's not been I think, a great embarrassment to any of these leaders. I think what we're seeing are a lot of domestic actors in these countries trying to use it to score points because there wasn't progress on any of those very thorny issues. Those issues are thorny precisely because they're very difficult to resolve. There's not many situations where the leader of a country like the UK or Sweden or Canada, any of these countries that have political prisoners in China, are going to be able to go cost-free, just ask Xi Jinping to release uh, somebody who may be a dual national, which China actually doesn't recognize, or any other political prisoner, and it'll be cost-free. The Chinese hold political prisoners because they know they can get something for that. So in fact, it can almost be a double-edged sword when action is taken to move for the release of political prisoners, other human rights concessions. Sometimes that is then the price for um, some other concession on the economic or political front that is desired. So it's a very difficult game to play, and there isn't an easy answer the way it's often framed by a lot of critics of these visits. But again, I do think, yeah, it is fair to question if just meeting and having a big a formal state visit and pretending like everything is completely rosy when there are a great amount of difficulties in the relationship isn't cost free. But I would say on the balance, it makes more sense to engage than to disengage. So what do you do in that context? You have to be informed. And I think it's very important that all countries, absolutely not just Western, but every single country, take really important steps to beef up their China expertise, to understand how Chinese leadership works, to understand China's foreign policy goals, to understand that it is completely serious about invading Taiwan, about taking control of, Filipino seaways, about threatening Japanese control of Okinawa and US control of Guam and all of these very serious threats. And if they do understand these things, then I think these leaders are much better positioned to engage with the Chinese. If they don't understand that, and if they don't understand how China is, manipulating media or diaspora in their home countries, attempting to interfere in elections or public perceptions or education or research, then they're not off onto an equal engagement. So I think that is essentially how I would uh, suggest leaders approach this kind of a visit. But that requires a whole national approach to this. This isn't just about a visit. This is about, how you run a country and protect your sovereignty and have a clear-eyed foreign policy.
I think, in my view, too, there are a lot of double standards when it comes to China. As in EU, foreign policy is based on normative ideas, but when it comes to China, I think there is a complete absence of normative values. But then also, if you look at the statement and if you look at the development that have happened during Merz's visit to China, there was no mention of systemic rival, China being a systemic rival. And I think that tells us that there is much more division than we actually see between the European countries. So, but also I feel that what is in the long run, getting China to change and having a fair competition in the market is a very, very tall order. So how do these leaders find a balance between their economic interest and strategic concern is something perhaps they really have to pay attention to. And we haven't really seen any country doing that as of now. I do understand, and I'm not saying that he shouldn't have gone to China. He should have totally gone, specifically when Trump's foreign policy is so erratic. There was an important economic rationale from the German side. Germany definitely needs China as of now, and strategically also it makes a lot of sense when the transatlantic partnership is becoming more and more problematic. And it's just not that Europe needs China; China also needs Europe, and this is something that maybe maybe France or Germany have adopted this appeasement policy towards China, and this is of course something that is not new. um, China needs international market more than ever, specifically with the trade dispute that is going on with Trump and then French leader, UK leader, German leader going to China. It also means that there is a divided Europe, and specifically after what happened to 17 plus 1 China Europe EU institutional mechanism, I think it makes much more sense for China from Chinese perspective to deal with these countries individually, and this is what China has been doing. So if there is more division in Europe, I think this is going to be more beneficial from Chinese interest. But I think what countries such as Germany and France need to also keep in mind that, of course, it's not easy, and I think it's now somewhat improbable, impossible to decouple from China, and specifically without any economic cost, because these countries are heavily dependent on China economically. But also what they also have to focus on is that they cannot really ignore the strategic costs that are attached with engaging with the Chinese leadership without spelling out their interest concerns more vocally. So I think there is this conflict, this dilemma. But then, if these countries talk about normative values, they have to practice it before preaching it to countries that they think that they could easily preach to. And China is a problematic country, and if they don't do it, so I think they really lose this opportunity to be the normative leader of the world.
I would just add one thing to that too on this question of decoupling and values. Like Germany, they talk about how they're at war with Russia, essentially. I mean, this is how they talk about Russia. You can argue they're certainly more or less at war. They're preparing for war footing with Russia. They have not decoupled from Russia. They've still not decoupled their economy from Russia. So it is completely unrealistic to expect that Germany would take those actions regarding China, which is even more essential to the German economy. So I think we have to remember that when we think about what we can expect from what Europeans are going to achieve in this context.
And that's interesting, actually, what you mentioned here, because you both agree that different European countries have different attitudes towards China and towards Russia, as a matter of fact. And yet recently, Keir Starmer was in China. A bit before that, Emmanuel Macron was also in China. How do you compare the visit of Chancellor Merz with the visit of the two others?
I think it's just that it's following mass mentality, as in if one leader is going, they also have to go. So I think it's just that, fine, we're having issues with the US, so let's just focus on China as of now. As I already mentioned, that for a lot of countries it's becoming easier to deal with China than the US. I don't think these leaders visiting China mean there is a strategic reset in China, EU, or China's relationship with European countries as a whole. I think it's just a diplomatic maintenance that they just have to go and talk to China, and just to project this idea that at least we are talking, we are negotiating, and perhaps we could also come up with solutions to the problems. I don't think anyone is looking at long-term tangible outcomes, because if you look at all these countries' perspective, the idea is to get improved market access from China, clearer investment protections, and a solution to trade disputes. So, as I said, that it's a tall order to get China to change. So the idea is just to keep the negotiation channel open, and we do not really know how Trump is going to act in times to come. It's just been a year; he has been in power, but so much has happened in 1 year. Uh, how this transatlantic partnership is going to change in times to come, how the economic relationship is going to be, I don't think anyone could guess. So the idea is just to maybe at least have somewhat normalized relation. You can't really say that anyone could have normalized relationship with China, given China has ulterior objectives, specifically with respect to using economic dependence as a political tool, as a political objective. But I think it's very important for all these countries to be very, very vocal about the concerns they have. I don't think following the appeasement policy towards China and not really vocalizing the concerns, be it normative, be it strategic security issues, I don't think it's really going to play to their advantage. And I think this is very, very important that all these countries, liberal democracies, keep this in mind while engaging with China. So, what is a bigger threat in times to come? Economic plus security threat that is emanating from China is going to be way, way bigger than whatever we are seeing as of now. And in terms of a Taiwan contingency, what is going to happen? What is the approach of these countries going to be? We have no idea. So I think a little bit of economic strategic clarity is something that perhaps would make things better and clearer as of now.
I would just add one thing there. I think there's a schizophrenia in the way that these countries are engaging with China. And let's take the Canadian example. So right before Carney's visit to China, there was a bipartisan delegation of lawmakers from Canada to Taiwan, which is an important, way to engage with Taiwan. It's an important show of solidarity, and it's an important way of showing that it's a cross-partisan issue, and it's a national policy that Canada will support the status quo in Taiwan. And on the eve of the visit, the two ruling party lawmakers immediately left Taiwan halfway through the visit. And the conservative opposition lawmakers stayed, and I think this is a terrible look for Canada. I mean, it makes it look like this is a transactional issue that Canada is willing to offer China concessions on Taiwan, that their policy towards Taiwan runs through their policy towards Beijing, rather than being independently determined based on Ottawa's foreign policy interests. And furthermore, it polarizes the issue, where you have a good signal of a cross-party delegation attending. Now it becomes a partisan issue where the ruling party is decreasing the engagement with Taiwan, and the opposition is using it as a tool then to attack the ruling party, which may feel good to some who are supporters of Taiwan, but in the long term is not healthy because you need cross-party support if you don't want to get suffer major losses, as you see with the polarization of these issues in the U.S., whether it's Ukraine, Israel, or other foreign policy issues. And finally, to that effect, still have this comprehensive trade agreement that's been signed between that has been written between Taiwan and Canada that has remained on the shelf. It is in completely final stage. They have the full texts in Chinese, in English, and in French. Every single detail has been negotiated as of halfway through last year, actually, and it's still not been signed. And everyone has been expecting it to be signed by autumn of last year. So why is this? This is showing that there's a lack of strategy in Canada's engagement with the Indo-Pacific. It's showing that they're trying to mortgage some compromises on Taiwan, maybe to get something from Beijing. And this is not in Canada's interest. This is not in Taiwan's interest. Ultimately, this will be in Beijing's interest. So this is not to say that visiting China is bad, but what we are seeing is that there's a lack of strategy for engaging with China and for approaching the Indo-Pacific, and that is the problem.
Indeed, that is the problem. And the truth is that the two issues are not necessarily coterminous for a lot of these national leaders. Just because they engage with China on something does not mean that they are going to be against Taiwan. We saw it that here, Chancellor Merz still said that Germany's one China policy remains unchanged, that any efforts toward reunification or unification, he used both words probably to be a bit diplomatic, between China and Taiwan can only be achieved peacefully, not by military means. So we in Taiwan have a tendency to think that it's always central, but actually they're not mutually exclusive. It's possible for a country to try to get some business deals with China without being on China's side when it comes to Taiwan.
But, of course, it's very much a fact that these topics are not really interrelated. A lot of countries could actually engage with China in the economic domain, but could also stand with Taiwan. But, in the long run, it doesn't really work out like that. And this is one of the reasons why China has cultivated this economic over dependence so that China could actually use this as economic coercion when time comes, when, in a potential Taiwan contingency. So this is one of the reasons why I always say that even with India, this huge trade imbalance and the investment that China is trying to put in India is a form of economic coercion. Why? Because if a difference comes up tomorrow, then China could use this economic dependence to deal with the Taiwan issue. So I think in the long run, it's just definitely going to be a problem for a lot of countries who are saying that, we could have economic engagement with China, but at the same time, we could also um, stand with Taiwan against China. I don't think that's how it's going to work out. And I think we are really going to be in a very difficult situation if this economic overdependence issue is not resolved anytime soon.
Again, I don't see a resolution to the economic dependency issues given the current context. So we'll see if the West and if other countries can come up with a strategy. But again, I would remind us that it's not just economic coercion from China. It is us in the West who have cultivated that dependency, and it is Western actors that have been deluded by great profits from China and the lure of the Chinese market and cutting profit margins by exporting industrial capacity to China. So, for all the talk we can say about the very real economic coercion China exerts, it has been all of us in the West and the other industrialized countries that have willingly given China that power. And lastly, I would just, be remiss not to mention, of course, in all of this is the rare earths question, which again is a capacity that the West willingly gave away to China. It's a very dirty and expensive process, and no one likes doing it. So we thought we would save some money and improve environmental conditions by putting this all in China. And the result is that China has us in a vice on this issue, and there's no quick way to get out of it.
Sana and Sasha, thank you so much for being with us today and clarifying what this meeting means.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julian. Pleasure to be on.
Taipei has just been through its big annual gaming event, the Taipei Game Show. It ran from January 29 to February the 1st at the Nangan Exhibition Center. Beyond the public player zone, it also hosted a business zone and an indie showcase area called Indie House, highlighting how Taiwan's gaming scene is tied into wider Asia-Pacific industry networks, from indie development to major publishers. This is not a peripheral topic for Taiwan's international standing. The video game industry worldwide generates more revenue than movies, books, and music combined. Its audience is international and attentive. For Taiwan, producing video games is also a way to expand its soft power. We spoke with someone who visited the event.
My name is Marcel Oppliger. I am a journalist from Chile, currently living in Taipei, where I host the YouTube channel Taiwan Edge.
As a specialist in Taiwan's tech scene, Marcel was able to experience the game show to the fullest and tells us what it really is about.
I went to the Taipei Games Show last month. Oh, sorry, at the beginning of this month, I believe. It's an international trade fair of the gaming industry. So there you have hundreds of exhibitors from countries all around the world showing their latest games. And in parallel of that, there is a B2B zone for the industry professionals to meet and get together and discuss deals and trade agreements and licensing agreements and things like that. And a day before the gaming show begins, there is the Indie Award Game Show, where you can see the games that have been winners of the Independent Games Award this for every year in 8 categories. I don't remember all the categories right now, sorry. But this year, 2 of the 8 winners were Taiwanese games in the visual art category and the best student game category. The fair lasts 4 days, so it's an enormous event that occupies a whole floor of the Nankan Exhibition Center in Taipei. So you have hundreds of thousands of visitors, or almost 500,000 visitors every year.
He also observed how Taiwan approaches video game as an industry.
It seems to be very active. Obviously, the biggest games in the international market, or the biggest company names, are usually from the United States and Japan, and a few companies from Europe. But I could see that Taiwanese games are slowly making a mark. Maybe not in the biggest AAA games, but certainly in the independent games. You can see Taiwanese developers um, showing interesting titles and with very attractive propositions, such, for example, as the two that won the visual arts category and the best student game category in the Indie Games Awards. Those are very small companies, but their games are very high quality, very nice looking, and well, fun to play, which is really the most important part.
The term indie scene refers to small video game developers. They are numerous and their audiences enormous, especially in contrast to their small size. Taiwan has already seen success with indie video game developers. One only needs to look at Red Candle Games and its 27 title Detention. The studio was so effective in spreading Taiwan's voice that it ended up drawing the attention and anger of China. We also spoke with an indie game development studio in Taiwan that was present at the Taipei Game Show. Called FromDawnGames, it was showcasing its game Aeruta.
I'm Burb, the developer of Aruta. I mainly work in programming and game design. We are from FromDawnGames. We made Aruta, a side-scrolling action platform game. Yes, the event was we attended the indie exhibition about the Taipei Game Show, and there are a lot of indie games like us. So there are a lot of different games, different game types, and different genres, and different people from different countries. So I believe although we have fewer AAA titles compared to other major markets, we have many different indie games and numerous well-known games companies choose to outsource works to studios here. Like we know Konami, a big Japan company, outsourced their Silent Hill game to companies in Taiwan. Like for us, this is a fresh and interesting experience. Our game is a side-scrolling action game. You can defeat monsters to get materials and use those materials to make breads and sell them.
Both Marcel and Burb confirmed that games matter and gave us examples of successful titles that made a real impact.
I think it's underrated, but potentially very important. Taiwan is known around the world mostly because of its semiconductor industry and because of its geopolitical situation. But there are many innovative industries here in Taiwan that are not paid the attention they deserve in spite of their importance and their influence in the biotech sector, energy sector, smart manufacturing, artificial intelligence, healthcare, etc. And I believe video games can be added to that list as a way of presenting Taiwan as a country that is much more than just semiconductors and geopolitical tensions with its big neighbor. Video games are something that everybody can enjoy. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man, of course. Really, anyone can enjoy games. And the possibility of reaching a global audience that just wants to have fun with a Taiwanese product can have a massive influence in the way that people perceive Taiwan, as a place that generates entertainment content, such as movies, such as TV series or video games, and not a place that only makes news because of problems or just business.
Yes, I believe so. Video games are also a form of culture. Through games, we can allow people around the world to see works that represent where we come from. I think Light Source is a example. It has some culture. It has some cultures in they combine the culture and their special genre to make people will want to see more about this. This game is about it combines Daojiao, a religion in Taiwan, and their unique art style to make it looks cool.
In the Taipei Game Show, in the exhibition itself, at the end of the third day, I think, and there at the end of my visit, I saw a Taiwanese company that is showing a game that I believe is not commercially available yet. They are in the last stages of developing, and it's called Kinmen. And it's a game that presents itself as it's a shooter game based on the possibility of an attack on Kinmen. So I thought that was very specifically Taiwanese, and I believe their logo is something like a defense for Taiwan or something like that. I thought that was pretty striking and interesting to look at.
All in all, Taiwan would be well advised to support its small indie game developers, as their impact on Taiwanese soft power goes far beyond what we might expect.
The Taipei Video Game Show was amazing. Like I said before, it's 4 days with hundreds of thousands of people enjoying themselves, playing hundreds of games in a huge space. It was a lot of fun to be there. It shows you a face of Taiwan that global audiences rarely see, which is this is a completely normal country where people go out and have fun at events like this one, and you can see the creativity of not only Taiwanese developers but also, of course, international developers. It's a very influential fair in Asia for the video game industry. Lots of business are conducted in the business to business zone. And well, it's not my place to invite you, but I do invite you actually to go to the Taipei Game Show Fair in 2026 at the end of January, because I really believe you will have a lot of fun and you will definitely find something you like.
We will meet again next week for a new episode of Taiwan versus the World.